Welcome to Plant Your Seed. I'm your host, Fred Ferris. On each episode, we share stories of how ordinary people have transformed their lives. Each story is compassionate, each story is authentic, and each story is a transformation. Here are the stories of the people who are changing our world by transitioning to a plant-based diet. Today on Plant Your Seed, joining us from Columbus, Ohio, we have Iye Bako. Iye's focus revolves around compassion and creating change. She skillfully intertwines her passion for veganism, social justice, and beauty and wellness in her work. Originally from Nigeria, Iye's journey embodies a rich tapestry of experiences. Welcome, Iye.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks for being here on Plant Your Seed. I'm always curious about how people started their plant-based journey. Can you tell us how and why you transitioned to a plant-based diet?
Yes, well, I was just in the spirit of change. It was around December of 2016, and that's the time people start thinking about their New Year's resolutions. And I decided I wanted to eat less meat because I was already on the trajectory of eating less meat. And then I had asked my Facebook friends back in the day, like, does anyone have any tips to go vegetarian? Because I didn't know much about veganism back then. And one of my friends commented that I should look into the documentary Forks Over Knives. And I watched that documentary and it spoke to me because at that time, my dad had previously been diagnosed with cancer for many years. He had had cancer. And that was the first documentary I've heard that connected our diet to chronic health disease. And I was like, I need to start, taking more control over what I eat and trying to eat as, whole food, plant-based as possible. By the end of the documentary, I wasn't convinced to go vegan, but I was convinced to eat more plant-based. And after I ate plant-based for the period of a few weeks, I just felt an amazing, shift. And I was like, well, why do people go full vegan? Like, what's the vegan scene about? And I went on YouTube and I searched up things and I came across a short video called Dairy is Scary. And it tells you in graphic detail exactly what happens to cows in the dairy industry for us to get our milk and yogurt and cheese and all of our dairy products. And I was horrified. I'd never known that cows were separated from their mothers in such horrific ways and the abuse and exploitation they experience. And I decided right there and then that I was going to go vegan.
So when you look back on that and you saw Dairy is Scary and you think about that moment, what was going through your head?
I was thinking the fact that this information is hidden from us because we're always shown pictures of happy cows and happy farms and green pastures. And while I live in Ohio, so I've driven past dairy farms, so I kind of have an idea that they're not necessarily living the best of lives. At the same time, you just have that, wholesome picture in your head that this is the way we've always done things and we need, cow's milk to survive. So you kind of like anything negative, you push it to the back of your mind and you don't really think about it. And then I felt a little bit angry and upset that I didn't know that, cows just don't make milk for humans. They make milk to feed their children. And that was the first time I ever put two and two together. And so it was also kind of a relief to know that I no longer have to participate in that industry if I don't want to.
Now, what did it feel like when you realized you were contributing to such a massive systemic oppression?
I mean, honestly, horrible. I think anyone who is compassionate and is able to connect the fact that these are living beings that deserve our love and protection and compassion, to the fact that they're living such miserable lives as a result of our consumption, would come to the conclusion that this is something that we should all be outraged by because none of us need to consume dairy milk. Dairy milk has actually been linked to lots of chronic disease. It's actually linked to, osteoporosis and cancers, and just a lot of people have allergies to it. It's like the most common allergen. So if we're putting something in our bodies that's not really helping us and could actually be hurting us, I think that we should feel, outraged and we should be trying to change the system and do something different.
Now, when you changed over to a plant-based diet, what positive changes did you see?
I would say like the first thing was the weight was lifted off of me. It was kind of more of a spiritual experience. It was like I just felt like the heaviness had gone away. And then some people say they feel like a more like a mental clarity, and I definitely felt that. I think what made the biggest jump is the fact that I went from a standard American diet, an omnivorous diet, to eating like really whole foods. And so it's not going to be everybody who goes from eating an omnivorous diet to eating a plant based diet is going to feel the big shift. I think the big shift comes from when you start eating like, fruits, vegetables, grains, and stuff in their most natural form possible.
Mm.
And I'm not anti eating like vegan processed food by any means, but I think what made the biggest shift is the fact that I went straight from omnivore to whole food plant based.
What did it feel like? You said it was a spiritual kind of awakening. What did it feel
Yes.
like to be living in line with your values?
I felt a lot more connected to nature, and I felt like I was living more in harmony with nature. Like, this is the way that we are meant to live as human beings. And I also felt like it's quite a shame that, every vegan says this, that I didn't know about this earlier, because I
Mm.
believe that we're intended to eat whole foods, to eat plants, because it gives our bodies energy. It also, it takes less resources away from our Mother Earth, and we all know that we're in a climate crisis. I feel like I valued the food that I was eating a lot more because I knew where it was coming from and the fact that it wasn't going directly to cause the harm of animals.
Did you struggle with anything, whether it was family or friends or even just the change itself when you first became vegan?
Yeah, I like when people are really open about this question, because there's always people who are going to be like, I had no problems and no struggles when I first made the transition. I would say there's a multitude of things that I experienced. Like, first of all, is you have to change your entire lifestyle. You have to change the restaurants you go to. You have to let your family and friends know that you're making this transition and why you're making this transition, so that they'll know when you say, hey, I don't want to go to the zoo to hang out with you guys and
Mm.
the animal petting place to hang out with you guys. It's not because you don't like them, it's just because you don't like the activity and who it's harming. And then there's the fact that you might be, changing over some of your clothes and your toiletries, and people are going to be like, whoa, what are all these changes going on? And
Hmm.
I think, like, for me with my family, I told them gradually, because I transitioned to being vegan from being plant based. So, I told them that my diet was changing, and then I started telling them that I was changing things about my life because of the animals. And so they were very open and receptive to it. I didn't just like drop a bomb on them and they're all like, "How do we figure this out?" We'd already started trying out plant-based restaurants and trying out different cuisine, and finding other activities to do over time. So I think being patient and having grace and not being a stereotype of the angry vegan helps a lot. And also having patience with yourself, because you're going to find out that like some of your favorite foods, you can no longer eat them anymore, and you have to find alternatives. And you may have cravings for foods that you once used to eat, and finding alternatives for those. So I think it's all about having self compassion and also giving your loved ones time to adjust to such a big change.
What is the best way to change people's minds?
I believe it's leading by example, and definitely the patience aspect of it, because people hate being pushed and forced. And then on top of that, like, veganism is a whole lifestyle. It's not just a diet. So
Mm.
you're not going to like convince people to go vegan overnight, especially your friends and family, because they still have a lot of pre-programming from the way society teaches us that animals are objects and animals are meant to be consumed. And so they have to overcome quite a bit of information that they've had for the last 10, 20, 30, 60 years of their life to be more accommodating and open-minded to this lifestyle. And some of them, like my family, they made small changes, and some families they make big changes. Some families decide to go vegan, and I think it's about giving them that example, like, you can be happy and you can live your life the best way possible without harming animals. And when they see that you're able to do that, even if you're not seeing the changes, they're noticing that, and they
Hmm.
want to be more interested in what it is that you're doing.
What is it about veganism that resonates so deeply with you?
I just believe it's the fact that for me, I've always been someone who's for justice and equality and anti-oppression, and knowing the fact that we treat other beings so miserably, and we take away their ability to live the way they would live in nature, it makes me feel like we should be standing up against the exploitation of other animals. And I feel like I'm someone who advocates for human rights as well. That humans should be equal and be treated justly and fairly in the current system that we're in. That I just extend my compassion to other animals. So it's just for me, veganism is an extension of the values that I've always had.
When did you realize that the animal rights movement was a social justice movement?
To be frank, it wasn't at the very beginning because I came in through the health side of things. So I was thinking it was a diet, it's gonna, help prevent, heart disease, diabetes, all those chronic illnesses and things like that. And then I knew that I was, standing against, oppression when I learned about what happens to dairy cows. And it wasn't until my friend, got me involved in doing activism against my will at first, because I always was like, I don't want to be a stereotype of those angry vegans who's out there protesting. But, they softly introduced me to some activism groups. And when I, started speaking openly about what was happening to animals, then I began to connect this with the social justice movement because I, started watching YouTube videos of other activists. I just started making friends with other activists and seeing the scale of what was happening, also through documentaries like Earthlings,
Hmm.
and just reading my own studies and doing my own research online. I just began to make more and more connections that this is a social justice cause because these are other beings who don't deserve to be oppressed. And I'm somebody who doesn't like the phrase like I'm a voice for the animals because I believe the animals do have their own agency, but I believe that I'm an advocate and ally alongside the animals to help
Hmm.
other people know the situation that's going on.
Now, people always say, I don't know how to start. How did you get your start in being an activist?
I think it comes from within. It's you should first focus on the talent, skills, and abilities that you have, and use that as an angle or a way to advocate. And for me, I have always been like into social media and into sharing awareness through social media. I've always liked to cook, and I've always liked to talk to people about things that I'm passionate about. So it just made sense to use that avenue to show my cooking as a way to express that we can enjoy food, many of the same foods that we used to eat, and live healthy and fulfilling lives. And social media reaches so many people. I think that it's a great avenue, but it doesn't necessarily have to be social media. Like you can advocate in your workplace with any of the talents and abilities that you have and make it a natural thing, like to bring it up when it makes sense
Hmm.
instead of trying to like fit into the mold of what someone else is doing. I think that's where a lot of people fail is like, oh, someone else is successful because they have like hundreds of thousands of social media followers and doing this particular style of activism, whether it's like street interviews and things
Hmm.
like that. And I thought at first I needed to do street interviews in the beginning because it's what I saw. But then I realized like I'm not as talented in that type of activism and I'm more passionate about cooking and lifestyle and just like fun activities. And it still reaches people, but in a different way and maybe a different audience. But I think focusing on what you're already talented at helps a lot.
So, how do you strike the balance between being an activist and not alienating people to the movement?
Yeah, I think that it's a challenge because when you talk about, animal exploitation, it's immediately a turnoff. But many people don't want to know because they want to enjoy their steaks and their burgers and their seafood restaurants because you know, we've been taught all of our lives like to eat those foods like the pinnacle of success. Like you're enjoying high life if you're at a steak restaurant.
Mm.
And if I'm telling you that those cows were killed in very brutal ways, it can be a turnoff. So what I try to do is approach it from a way that a lot of people love to eat. They love food. They actually don't really care if the food is vegan or not. They just want it to be pretty and appetizing and to taste really good. So I talk about the things that people like, and then I tell them, well, you can accomplish this without having to use or harm or exploit other animals. You can make alternatives to all of your favorite foods, even the cuisines that you grew up with, whether it's, traditional, plant-based Nigerian food, or Asian cuisine is very vegan friendly, and Indian cuisine and all these other types of world cuisine can be very vegan friendly with just a few swaps here and there. So I think it's just relating to people on the level of things that they're already interested in, and then throwing in the angle of, you know, this is a way to eat without causing the harm and the exploitation that we normally would when we're eating animal products.
Now, on your Instagram page, EA Loves Life, you have a lot of Nigerian food. Now, our listeners are probably very familiar with Mexican or Chinese food, but what are some of the staples of Nigerian food?
In Nigeria, we have such a varied diet because we live in like one of like the bread baskets of the world. Tropical climate. There's a lot of options, so we eat a lot of starchy foods like yam, plantains, rice, and there's different variations of soups that we like to eat with pounded yam. Some people call it fufu, but there's all different types of, heavily starch based, um, carbohydrate side dish that you can, pound into almost like a ball, and you pinch it off and you dip it into different soups. So there's like peanut flavored soups, there's tomato based flavored soups, there's okra stews, there's egusi, which is not commonly known in the Western world, but it's made with a specific type of melon seed, and
Mm.
it's made into a soup. And there's so many different, varieties. I mean, I think everyone knows jollof rice at the very least, because
Mm-hmm.
it's like kind of like a rice pilaf with a tomato base. That's pretty famous worldwide. That it's a delicacy in West Africa. Yeah, I think that everyone should try to explore more Nigerian food, because Nigeria is the most populous country in Africa. So if you want to know African food, at least get interested in finding out what Nigerians are eating.
Now, what was your reason that you started EA Loves Life?
It was primarily because I was going to protest, and I was talking with my family about the vegan lifestyle, and I felt like I was not having as big of an impact as I could have, because I think like when you're in a small, I would say in a smaller community,
Mm-hmm.
like you can only physically talk to so many people in person,
Mm.
but whereas you could reach thousands of people online, and that's what I wanted to do, and that's what I've been doing. I saw the potential of social media to spread a good and positive message to a broad audience.
Christopher Soul Eubanks was a previous guest on Plant Your Seed. He wrote an article, "As a Black man, I felt uncomfortable becoming an animal activist." What has been your experience?
In my experience, I haven't really experienced like the discomfort, um, not per se the way that Christopher experienced it, because I know Christopher and they're very vocal and very active in terms of organizing events. And I think
Mm-hmm.
that that puts them on the forefront, versus I attended events. I wasn't necessarily the organizer of protests and things that I went to, but I knew that, as a Black woman, that I would not want to be in any encounters with police, because they're in the US, they're definitely stricter and harsher on, people of color, and especially
Mm.
Black people. So when I would go to protests, I would always have to have that extra eye to be cautious that I wasn't, close to where any, police officers would start anything with me. And I don't think that my fellow activists felt that additional pressure. Like, yeah, they knew that a police officer could come and disrupt or just, break up what we were doing.
Right.
But it was that additional fear of like, well, they could actually like try and arrest me just because I'm here because of my race. So I would say I had to be extra vigilant because of it. And then I would say the other avenue of it was the fact that people loved the work that I was doing, and there was white folks that would be like, "Oh, you're like the only Black activist I know. Would you be a part of this?" And that was kind of uncomfortable. It's like you want me to be part of something specifically because of my race, and not necessarily just because I'm good at something. I
Mm-hmm.
understood where they were coming from. Like they wanted the diversity angle, but it was maybe the way they asked that was a bit uncomfortable.
What can we do to bring more people of color to the movement?
I think it's genuinely being interested in the work that people are doing, and opening up to like I think it's exactly what you're doing, having people of different ethnicity and races on your podcast. I think what's happening in the vegan movement is people aren't seeing enough examples of people who look like them.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think it's up to, white organizations and individuals to be more proactive in reaching out and being welcoming and being open. And then on top of that, it's the fact that a lot of times people of color feel like their resources, their knowledge, and their experiences are looked down upon and not valued as equally as their white counterparts.
Mm-hmm.
And so I would say it's more about showcasing the work and uplifting the work that, Black and people of color activists are doing, passing the mic as often as possible. Yeah, there's a lot of things like within the movement, spreading the funds around in terms of funding the work of people of color, lifting them up so more people can see examples of people who look like them.
What is it about animal rights and oppression that makes you so passionate?
I think just with animal rights, for me, it's the fact that most people on this planet are not vegan. Most people don't know about animal oppression. And I think what makes me so passionate about it is because there's just not enough there's not enough momentum behind something that's so important, because people put it at like the bottom of the list of oppression because we're focused on the day-to-day living. Like we're living under a capitalistic system that takes away our time, takes away our focus. We're all fighting to survive.
Mm-hmm.
So animals are at the very bottom. And just like knowing the fact that there's just not enough momentum behind this movement makes me extra passionate, because the number of animals that are being killed is in the billions. And on top of that, even living here in Ohio, I'm directly experiencing the catastrophic effects of climate change. Every single year, it's getting warmer and warmer. We barely had a winter this year.
Right.
And most people don't know how connected animal agriculture is to climate change. So I just think it's the fact that this movement hasn't really reached the mainstream enough yet that makes me so passionate.
What is it about making the connection between the moral and ethical issues that's so important?
I think for a lot of people, the vegan movement gets dismissed because they think that this is a lifestyle, this is just for fun, this is a trend or a passing fad. And so the moral aspect gets pushed way to the bottom because people don't take the vegan movement seriously enough. And so I just want people to be reminded that this movement is about anti-oppression for animals, but beyond that, for all beings, because all oppression is interconnected. And if we're taking care of other animals, our mindset is in the right place to take care of human beings as well. So I think we have to keep reminding people of the moral and ethical implications of oppressing other animals, because otherwise people just think that we're doing this to be trendy and to get attention and just to be different. And that's really not what it's about.
What would you say to someone that says, first, we need to have social justice for all people before we start on animals?
I would say to them, I'm not sure if this is the exact quote by Leo Tolstoy, but as long as there's slaughterhouses, there will always be battlefields. And so if we're continuing to oppress other animals, human beings will never be free, because all oppression is interconnected. So you don't have to focus on one thing at a time. It's completely possible to work on animal oppression and fight human oppression at the same time.
Now, it seems to me sometimes the vegan movement is split into different factions, right? There's health, there's the environment, there's animal rights. How can we get all of these factions together to work towards the common goal?
I think one of the most challenging aspects of that is the infighting, because everyone thinks that the way that they came into the movement or the way they talk about the movement is the most important. Because, I've seen where people online have said, like, the vegan movement doesn't need more recipe creators and lifestyle activists. The movement needs more, people on the ground, doing direct action or doing street interviews or doing this and that. I think it's just about reminding people that we all have a place in this movement, and all of the work that we do is fundamentally important to the movement. Like the how to do that is very difficult, because I think it just involves having open conversations and bringing people together. I think apex advocacy that Christopher Eubanks founded is a great way to do that. I believe that they incorporate foodie activists. They incorporate activists that are going to marches and going to protest together. So if more vegan organizations could spotlight the work that different types of people are doing and, show it in a positive way, I think that would help more people to see how it all works together.
Where did you get the courage to start?
The courage to start, I don't necessarily think that it took courage. I think that for some people, there's like a social stigma with being vegan. And I think I've always been an outsider my whole life. Like I grew up in Ohio and I'm like an immigrant from Nigeria. So I've always kind of been like the person who's different in a classroom, the person who's different in various different spaces in my life. So it didn't necessarily feel like having courage. It was just like, well, here's another thing that I'm different about. So if I'm passionate about it, I just have to speak up. So I don't think that I have to overcome as much as that social stigma as other people who have always fit in their whole lives have to feel.
It's a beautiful way to look at it.
Mm.
What is one thing that's really exciting for you right now, either in your life or with EA Love's life?
Well, in the next chapter, I'm going to be doing more public speaking. I've done public speaking in the past. I'm part of an organization called Plant the Power 614, which is a community of people of color who are educating people about the plant-based lifestyle and about veganism and animal rights. So we have our Plant the Power Veg Fest coming up this August that I'm helping co-organize. And then I'm going to be speaking at the Women's Summit in May, Vegan Women's Summit that's going to be in Hollywood, California. And then I'm going to be working more on long format content like YouTube and my own personal website. So there's a lot going on.
Yeah, it sounds like it.
Mm-hmm.
Now, what is one habit, hack, or tip that helps you stay on track with your plant-based diet?
I would say, in terms of staying on track, I'm always connected to the fact that habits and routines is just like it's just the length of time that you do it. So I think like there's a statistic that says like once you do something consistently for like 22 days, like you can keep it up as a habit. And I think like because I've been vegan for almost 7 years here in a few months, actually like next month will be 7 years. I'm just so used to it. I'm so used to like what I eat on a regular basis, and I think I stay grounded because I follow a lot of other vegan activists and other plant-based recipe creators, and so they always like keep me thinking about plant-based food that I should try next, and like learning about the wins that animal rights activists are having. Just like I think it's all a mental game, right? It's the stuff that you consume. So if you're consuming a lot of content that's not related to being vegan or plant-based, and I think it's easy for people to backtrack, but I'm mostly surrounded by like vegan friends or activists or vegan allies in my life. So that's what keeps me on track.
What is one cookbook, book, or documentary that you've either gifted or recommended to someone who's transitioning to a plant-based diet or who's interested in transitioning?
So the documentary I recommend to a lot of people is What the Health. What the Health is one of the documentaries that got me thinking of the social injustices that also affect humans because I did not know about the fact that manure is sprayed onto communities of color and how it impacts their health and the cancer diagnosis and other health impacts they have as a result of what's going on with the animal agriculture industry. A lot of people kind of feel like activists are only focused on animals, but it was like a really good documentary that shows you how it affects all aspects of our life. How our food system is set up, how it impacts the environment, the human health, and the animals. So I think that that's like a really great one. In terms of books, like one of the ones I'm consuming right now that I love is the Korean Vegan Cookbook. She's coming up with a new one, but I'm a big fan of like Asian cuisine as well. And I recommend that to a lot of people because Joanne Molinaro is such a fabulous storyteller and her pictures are so great and the recipes are very delicious.
What is the most rewarding part of what you do?
I think it's getting feedback from my audience and from my community that something I shared has had an impact on them and like that I'm one of their favorite creators. And so I think it's just like all of the positivity that I'm having a positive impact on other people and that they enjoy the work that I do.
Now, finally, can you give me one word to describe how you felt before you were vegan and one word to describe how you feel now that you are vegan?
That's a good question. I would say before being vegan, like how I felt is just, I would say, it's a hard one. I'll say like just average, like just average, like, and then like after going vegan, I feel empowered.
Mm.
I think the biggest shift that is just having this information that we can do something about what's happening in our society. So I feel empowered now.
So average and empowered.
Yeah.
I love that. I love that. Such a pleasure speaking to you. Thank you so much for taking the time. What is the best way for people to follow you, support you, either on Instagram, the web, or social media in general?
Yeah, I would say my biggest platform is my Instagram account, so definitely follow me there. And I'm basically on all social media platforms with the same username, which is EA Loves Life, which is spelled IYE Loves Life. So definitely check me out on wherever you're on the most, whatever platform you're on the most.
Thanks again, EA, for being on Plant Your Seed.
Thank you so much again for having me.
Hope you are inspired by this story, and remember, it's never too late to plant your seed. Links to everything we talked about on the podcast can be found on Instagram at plant.yourseed in the show notes tab in the bio. If you enjoyed the show, remember to leave us a review, and until next time, thank you for listening.